He is the author of 2 books. One of those, we had the privilege of having him at Silica earlier this year, talking about his book Magnetize. He is part of Singularity University, so those of you that were there in Johannesburg last month would have seen him talking there. And generally just talking in the world of, living in the world of disruption and making us think differently. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Is my mic working? Yeah, great. So I know it's me and then cocktails. So this will be the quickest 3 hours of your lives. So let's get busy. A lot to get through. I, with much enthusiasm, share ideas about the future. And when I started doing this about 10, 15 years ago, I would categorize and contextualize the future and take it into boardrooms and conferences and share them with much jubilation about what's coming and how exciting it is. And the room as well would be quite excited about what was coming. And then I'd go back 6 months later and absolutely jack shit had changed. And then I decided that there was maybe something wrong with me, but very quickly realized that the psychology of human beings is what stops us from really taking on new tasks. I mean, we all talk about only exciting things outside your comfort zone and blah, blah, bullshit, all of that stuff on Instagram and all those memes, but all of us stick to exactly what we've always done in the past, hoping for a different result tomorrow. And so when I first started writing my first book, I decided to spend 50% of it on human psychology and 50% it on the future. And again, with much excitement, we'd go to boardrooms, excos, and conference centers, go back 6 months later, and still nothing had changed. So my second book is 80% psychology and 20% future, because when you get the psychology right, nobody needs to tell you about the future, you'll be creating the future. And so this has become my task, is to help people understand what it is that's holding us back from all these incredible things that have been shared by only the 2 speakers I've seen. But you know, they're incredible, but we still seem to do what we've always done. So join me on a journey today. I call the talk Leadership in the Age of Digital Disruption. And I think it's really important for us to realize, as you mentioned earlier, is that leadership very much starts with ourselves. I often get this question after my keynotes is, what should we be doing for our kids, John? And the answer is, your actions are so loud, I can't hear a word you're saying. And that's the thing, is that the way we prepare is by how we go about adopting agility and flexibility and experimentation as we move into the future. If you think about what the press was doing about 5, 7 years ago, the word that was being thrown around like confetti was innovation. Everybody had a new innovation department, and all of a sudden the word, if you look on the Google sort of searched words, you can see it spikes from about 2013, 2014, and it's just like everywhere is innovation. And obviously, being an innovation naturally inherent in my system, I get excited about this topic until I saw a newspaper article from Seif Property Group. And it was a couple of years ago, and the heading was, "We are the most innovative company or real estate company in South Africa." So with much excitement, I opened up the newspaper to find out what this incredible innovation was, and it was show days on Wednesdays. And I thought to myself, wow, this word innovation has just lost its allure. It's just become a bullshit word that we all throw around for marketing, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that anytime you see innovation, you're like, yeah, whatever, it's just a marketing ploy. But today, there's a new cousin of innovation. It's an ugly cousin, Innovation 2.0, or disruption. This is the new word that's been thrown around. We are all very excited to be planning the disruption of our sector, our businesses, etc., etc. But there's always a very clear chance, as a 16-year-old girl in Kailicha right now planning your disruption and you becoming the disrupted. And this goes for me as well, and every sector around the world that I speak in always struggle from exactly the same scenario, is how do we prepare ourselves, how do we prepare our organizations for the future that could possibly be disrupted? But I want to start the journey around 5,000 years ago. And 5,000 years ago was when, as humankind, we started to understand this concept of business. And it initially started off with bartering, where you would have a goat for your lazy husband. And soon enough, you ran out of lazy husbands, and then the goats, you needed to trade other things. And then eventually, there's no jokes for the lazy husband. That's funny, huh? Okay, great. I did make a chirp of a lazy wife at one of the talks, and that didn't go down well. Exactly. That was like, oh. So when you started running out of lazy husbands, you couldn't barter anything, and you had to start using currencies of the day. And this currency of the day, or the exchange for currency for the product or service of the day, was started off at the Silk Road, 3000 BC, where we saw the trade start from China, India, Middle East, North Africa, and East Africa. And this trade really started to grow exponentially, changing our concept of business and our understanding of it. And for the first few thousand years, this Silk Road was ruled by the Greco-Romans, and the Greco-Romans saw the rise of some incredible civilizations and the death of some incredible civilizations. In fact, civilizations that never thought they'd be disrupted are no longer with us, just to keep in mind. But the power dynamics shift in the Silk Road quite often, and you'll see how quickly they start changing as we start getting to the end of the first part of the talk. But in the 7th century, the power dynamics start to shift, and for 700 years, the Arabs become the most powerful over the Silk Road. The rise of Islam gives it the impetus to grow this trade really exponentially, and because they are still very entrepreneurial, they added a whole bunch of things like slaves and gold and the like to get the Silk Road to grow. By the 15th century, the power dynamics shift again, and now we see the Turks become the most powerful. As they were known back then, the Ottomans realized that they're very well geographically positioned, and because of this geography, they're able to add an incredible hefty tax to any products that are being traded from the east to the west, and so they started becoming incredibly wealthy, and a lot of other people started suffering. And because other people started suffering, we start to see innovation start to show its head for the first time around the 15th century. Any Portuguese people here? One. I can only mock one person the whole conference. So that's fine. I got a lot of poorer friends, so don't take it personally. So the Portuguese were the first country to sort of become angry of the fact that they had to pay these incredibly high prices, and through this frustration began something new called the European Age of Discovery, or as it's known today, the spice route. And they were frustrated by these high prices, so they went directly to the root of where the products came from in order to be able to get the products to the end market at far cheaper. If you've ever been to a Portuguese fruit and veg shop, they're doing exactly the same thing still today. But this was born thousands and thousands of years ago. And if you see the spice route goes directly to the source, the Silk Road overland, meaning many different middlemen, price going up. This almost was bringing the price down by up to 50 or 60% of some of the stock that was being traded directly from source to end consumer. Now, we know that when somebody's making a lot of money, all of a sudden they aren't able to make that much money because now the Portuguese were getting so wealthy, a lot of hostilities start to show up, and a lot of countries were fighting each other for a whole bunch of different pieces of land that used to hold the spices that was being traded as the main commodity. And while I was researching the keynotes, I was looking for certain stories that sparked my interest, and this one really caught my interest. In 1521, the most expensive piece of real estate, square meter by square meter, was an island called Run. Anybody heard of an island called Run? So back then, in 1521, there was major hostilities between England and Holland. And to calm the hostilities down, they started to do a treaty that would give up this little island called Run for this little island called Manhattan. Anybody heard of Manhattan here? Back then, Manhattan was just a farmland and worth really much nothing. About 500 years ago, not that much long ago. And today, nobody even knows where Run is. And this gives us an inclination of what disruption could look like as we start moving into the future. But let's keep carrying on because the power dynamics start to shift. 16th century, the Spanish become the most powerful for a while, then the Dutch, then the English, then the Portuguese, and the power dynamics are shifting depending on what pieces of land these countries and territories own. In the 17th century, in fact, the Dutch East Indian Company becomes the most powerful, and in fact, in today's terms, they would be worth $4.2 trillion as a business, the biggest ever known to humankind back then, and they ruled this sort of Silk Road and spice route for a while. In fact, in the 17th century, spices had become so valuable that were actually given out as bonuses to the dock workers. And so imagine today somebody came to you and said, well done, here's a bunch of cloves. And you would say to them, are you mad? But back then, just 500 years ago, you'd be a multi-millionaire. In fact, all of us sitting here must probably be multi-millionaires with just that one drawer of spices that we have in our kitchen. How things change. But let's really talk about this concept of spices, because We take this thing so for granted today, but back then we saw the rise and death of civilizations, people killed over something we take so for granted. And there's 4 reasons that spices were worth so much. The first one is this, is that people in the East had created this mystery and intrigue around spices. They were so difficult to plant, harvest, transport and warehouse that it becomes so laborious to create spices, so the people in the West bought into these stories and paid really inflated prices. Today it's called marketing. Anybody heard of that? Yes. Louis Vuitton, $68,000 for this bag that's only worth 4. So this mystery and intrigue started off many years ago. The second reason is the people in the West for the first time ever had access to a product that would make them feel better and more vital when they were alive. We all know that spices like turmeric bring our blood pressure down, ginger gets us to feel better when we've got a bit of a flu. This was brand new to the people in the West, so they paid these incredibly high prices. Also, when you were alive, you were more vital, but also when you died, spices were used to make you look a bit more perky before you got put back into Mother Earth through the process of embalming. So spices really had many different reasons to be celebrated and to be so hefty in price. But the most important reason that got spices to be worth so much is that people back then thought that spices kept food fresher for longer. And today we understand that's rubbish, because now we understand that spices gets rotten food to taste better for longer. And besides salt, actually no spice preserves food. So the last time you were eating a piece of meat that was rotten and it tasted okay, it was the paprika that made the rotten piece of meat taste okay. But this is actually the point of which disruption begins. Because for thousands of years, innovation had been done, making things more efficient, making cheaper and faster, like the spice route. But really, no disruption had been done in this trade. And it was in 1806 where we start to see, for the first time ever, disruption take hold. In 1806, this gentleman here, he became known as the Ice King, or Frederick Tudor. His family was in shipping and he lived in Boston, and what he wanted to do was increase the income streams that his family were gaining through the business of shipping. So what he was doing was experimenting with a whole bunch of different things. Sorry about that. He was experimenting with a whole bunch of different things, and what he was doing was taking 2 pieces of wood and putting a whole bunch of things in between them, trying to create some sort of insulation, and he realized that sawdust was the major product that would create a freezer of kind for the first time ever. So what he did was, once he had invented this sort of a concept of a container, he took his family's ships, he went to the cold parts of the world, and he loaded them up with tons and tons of ice to bring back to the warm parts of the world. And his idea initially was to get the ice to all the bar owners so they could sell cold drinks in summer. I mean, this was just revolutionary. In fact, so revolutionary that some people thought it was witchcraft, that they had this sort of cold thing in summer that had never really been experienced before by anybody back then. But by absolute mistake, he discovered that ice was the thing that kept food fresher for longer. And what he did was he left a crate of oranges on one of the shipments that he was bringing back by mistake. He wasn't doing it on purpose. And he realized that the oranges that was left on the ice actually lasted a lot longer than all the other oranges that they'd left off the ice. And this was just an incredible discovery. And because of this discovery, he changed his business model and he started creating ice boxes, because he understood that these ice boxes were able now to keep food fresher for longer. And what he was able to do is now start a distribution of ice into the wealthier families, giving them the option to keep their food fresher for longer. All of a sudden, the price of spice dropped to about 60% of what it was valued before, because all of a sudden spice was only there for flavoring and not for preservation that people had thought before. So every week, twice a week, you would get a delivery to your home by a guy who looked like a stripper delivering ice to your house. I don't know why my digital team used this character, but anyway, I'm going to keep him. So you would get ice delivered to your house twice a week so you could keep your food fresher for longer. Frederick Tudor, the Ice King, could do no wrong because his business was growing. Nobody else had a freezer. He had a whole mass of ships that he was able to get all this ice in. He was styling, except there was this new innovation that was starting to show up called electricity at the turn of the 19th century, and the universities and the labs were starting to experiment with this electricity to create more experimental space and truly push science as far as they could. And this gentleman here, by the name of John Gorey, invented the mechanical ice making machine. And what he wanted to do was just create ice for his own labs, but he started to disrupt or change the business that Frederick Tudor had, because he was able to make ice right here and deliver it to you right there. The price of ice now dropped by 80%. And this really started to piss off Frederick Tudor, and his natural ice business was melting away because of the mechanical ice making. That was a joke. Thank you very much for smiling. One person who's catching a wake up. So as his business was melting away, because he was pissed off about this, he started running a smear campaign, a huge marketing campaign, calling all the ice coming from John Gorey's mechanical ice making machine fake ice. You peasants buying fake ice from this person here, where I bring you the real thing from the other side of the world. We know that's bullshit today, because ice is just ice. But this innovation or invention called electricity started to show its head up in all over the place and became ubiquitously available. And now all of a sudden people were starting to have fridges everywhere. Quick show of hands. Anybody who doesn't have a fridge here? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. We won't judge you. It's fine, because we can't even imagine a life without a fridge today. Our fridges are a lot more than just compressors. They're like digital assistants connected to the internet. But what if I told you over the next 15 years, nobody here will have a fridge? I like that. Because you think to yourself, how is it possible that we will live our lives without a fridge? In fact, I can tell you that there's 2 cities in the world right now that have got a decline in fridge sales. I've got 2 cities in the world right now, same 2 cities, that the construction of apartments and condos, as they're called in these cities, are changing, with having smaller spaces for kitchens and much smaller spaces for fridges. And we are moving into an era of understanding that you need to store anything inside your homes for a longer period of a few minutes becomes ridiculous. We move from fridges to drone deliveries on demand. This is a concept that's now all over the place on social media, and we all think it's really far, 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 far away, but really, 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 it's not really that far away, and I'm going to show you why it's not so far away. And we will have a type of a fridge. It'll be called an eco-fridge. It'll sit on the outside of our homes, and it will give access to these drones to make the deliveries. And these eco-fridges will have algorithms and sensors that will be intelligent enough to know and understand what your doctor told you you're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat, give you a map out of what is allowed to be had. When it drops below a certain number, obviously place the order on your behalf. Now, again, if you think this is a little bit far-fetched, we have these blimps, patent pendings from Amazon right now that are looking at having these blimps hanging outside your home, outside your suburbs and sports fields, that will be able to deliver anything to your home. And what they claim, which I've read on I think it was a Quartz article, under 60 seconds, they want to get certain things delivered to our homes before we've even known that they've been ordered by the algorithms. And it's because of these blimps that are going to be hanging outside our homes, not the warehouses that are going to be very, very far away. So floating warehouses are going to be a thing of the future. And the first company that actually legislated drone delivery on demand was a company called Matinet in Switzerland, where they were able to start delivering blood between hospitals. And now the legislation is starting to change, where they'll be able to deliver anything below 14 kilos will now be able to get delivered utilizing these drones. Again, if you think this is a little bit far-fetched, here's a map of where drones are now becoming legal and legislated. Green is obviously go, yellow is about to get there, gray they're not sure, and red is a no-go. How many greens do you count? I count about 25 or 30 countries that are on the verge of starting to bring these sort of drone deliveries on demand. In the 2 cities that I was talking about, being San Francisco and New York, Amazon is able to deliver anything to your home in under 60 minutes. And we know Whole Foods, when I talk about anything, it's Woolworths Dis-Chem on steroids. Obviously natural steroids, organic steroids. And they're able to deliver anything to your house in under 60 minutes using this old invention called a car. You remember them? We used to get into them. These death traps. 1.2 million of us die a year because of these things. But if you look at these 2 cities, New York and San Francisco, here are the stats on the fridge sales starting to drop in New York and San Francisco. The point of the beginning of the keynote is this, is that none of the spice traders became ice traders. And none of the ice traders became mechanical ice manufacturers, and none of the mechanical ice manufacturers started manufacturing fridges. And has anybody seen a Defy drone or a Whirlpool drone or a Samsung drone? I haven't. None of the fridge manufacturers are becoming drone manufacturers. That's why my talk's called Leadership in the Age of Digital Disruption. And it's this leadership that we need to start buying into that is shifting the way we make decisions about the future. And just before I start really diving deep into what it looks like to be a leader in the future, let me just ask us a couple questions just to get the juices flowing. Or before I ask the questions, let me just tell us what disruption is doing new things that make old things obsolete. The most difficult thing for us to do as human beings is to say no to an income stream that's shrinking. Even if it's there, even if it's shrinking, we can't let go of it in order to jump ship. And to be really clear on it, here's the question. Are we living a life based on a set of memories of the past, or are we living a life based on the vision of our future? You see, most of us are living a life based on a set of memories. And a very few of us are living a life based on a vision of the future. Unfortunately, what happens to us as human beings, if we let go of our memories and our past, who are we? We just become nobodies. And we go into the unknown. And so we hold on to this idea of who we are just to make a statement into the world. But this becomes a huge problem in order to change and shift and create into the future. We have to let go of our past. And in order for us to understand this we need to become architects of this future, not actually victims of it. Quick show of hands, how many victims do we have here? No victims? Okay, obviously, because victims sit deep in our psyche. It's not something that we want to talk about it ever, because it just doesn't make sense, because in society, we're all architects, obviously, but really, it's a hard thing for us to become architects, because the way we become architects of this future is dependent on the questions we ask. And we've heard this many times, I'm sure you've read it many times, but Einstein really put it together well. He said, if I was given 60 minutes to come up with a solution that my life depended on, I would spend 55 minutes devising the question and understanding the problem and only 5 minutes answering it. And so if I ask you, when's the last time you asked a really uncomfortable question of yourself, your life, and your career, you'd say to me, John, I don't have time for that shit, dude. I got a lazy spouse, kids to drop off, a bonus to grab, I got end of year holidays to make plans of, I got 2 kids' birthday parties next month. I don't have time for a new question. Stop wasting my time. But if we don't ask questions that make us uncomfortable, we often end up like companies that we snigger at and laugh at and go, ha, 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 how did Nokia not see that? What a bunch of fools. But if you watch the news conference when Microsoft took them over, they went from a $100 billion business to a $7 billion business, that exco and that board members were crying. They were in tears. And the reason they were in tears is that they weren't lazy or stupid. They just went that way. They didn't have the audacity to ask the new question, while the market was starting to go that way. This gives us an inclination that as we move into the future, direction becomes a lot more important than speed. But we live in a structure that's called corporates, where we are bonus on efficiency and speed and not direction. And so we have to shift the way we measure success and how we measure people's bonus structure so we can create an ability to be more experimental. The best example I can give you of a company that changed direction was Apple, 1996. Steve Jobs came back, the company was in trouble, cut a bunch of different things, changed the direction of the business, and became the first American trillion-dollar business. One more example and story before we get stuck in is a company called Ox Baron in 1889 was the largest company in the world. They were set up in New York in America, and what they did back then was create all the wheels for the ox wagons. They were transporting products from point A to point B and point Z, and obviously now America was booming and they needed a lot of transportation of a lot of things. Nobody could do what they were doing at the production scale that they were able to do it, and so they were leading in the game. But what started to happen at the turn of the 19th century, this new invention called the railroads and the combustion engine started to arrive in America, making it a lot more efficient, cheaper, and faster for products to be transported from point A to point B. By the time they got to 1926 or 1920, they got into a lot of trouble. They actually declared it bankruptcy in 1926, but in 1920, they got in a bunch of trouble. They invited an innovation specialist to come and help look at their business to try and shift them. And what he came back with after 6 months of being in the business was this. He said, we've spent 80 years getting really good at something that nobody's going to need in 20 years. What I suggest we do is we change our production facility and we create a new type of wheel. Let's call it a tire. And we can add sort of polyether and rubber and steel and these sort of things in it. And so the board thought about it, and what they decided to do was fire him because they didn't like what he had to say. It took them too much out of their comfort zone. He left a little bit depressed, but his name was John Boyd Dunlop, and he created the world's third largest tire business. Imagine Ox Baron could have been doing that right now. And so all of this comes down to disruptive leadership traits. And what we do as old leaders, as leaders that used to think like we used to think a while back, is we ask innovation specialists and trend specialists to come into our businesses, but only ask them to disrupt our business within our own capability advantage. It's like, make us a better bank. Don't worry about anything else. Just make us a better bank. And what that says is that you're asking me to make you the best spice trader in a world that the future might not actually need any spice trade. The second problem that organizations have, or old leadership has, is we are very worried about our competition. And really, our competition is not our competition. We have no idea who our next fold of competition is. In fact, we don't even know what we're going to be doing next if we're being disruptive. We don't even know who our competition is going to be down the road. And really what we should be focusing on is what we all claim to be focusing on, this consumer centricity or human advantage. But most of us are balance sheet centric, and then consumer centric, and then employee centric. And this shifts the idea. And if you look at Amazon, very much consumer centricity is what drives that organization. You can see from how many times they've jumped sectors to be able to give the consumer what they want. They're not worried about their capabilities or competition at all, in fact. Another thing that we've been celebrating for very many years and spent hundreds and thousands of rands or dollars on to develop is our IQ. And we all know with artificial intelligence and machine learning, our IQ is going to be replaced in no time, in the next 5 to 10 years. And we need to stop giving it that much focus. And another thing that we are still giving focus to, and I don't think is unimportant, is EQ and this emotional intelligence, which I still think needs to be celebrated. But there's a new Q on the block. And the new Q is the one that we need to be flexing and training as much as possible, and it's agility quotient. The adaptability and flexibility and experimentation of us, our organizations, and the way we celebrate our people becomes of paramount importance for us to prepare for this future. And somehow, we've all become a version of Justin Bieber. And I write about Justin Bieber in my new book. And he's not like this, or maybe he is, but he represents something for me, definitely in society, I call the horny teenage boy syndrome. And the horny teenage boy syndrome is really what's happened around the world in business, because what there is this constant need for more over everything else. And this constant need for more is really derived from an immature masculine need for competition and more at all costs. And this has created havoc with disengaged workforce, environment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have to mature as a consciousness and as a people to start utilizing business for different reasons. And people that we look up to, the people that are creating huge waves around the world, apply themselves in the business structures very differently. I call it cathedral thinking. And what cathedral thinking is that if you had to build a cathedral or a church in the 1600s, it would take 3, 4, 5 generations of your family to finish it. And that's the sort of concept, the elegant, deliberate way that we get ready for the future is what we need to be doing and thinking about, rather than just going from quarter to quarter measuring the profitability. I saw a meme on Instagram with 3 guys sitting around the boardroom table with a balance sheet with an apocalypse going outside the window, but then showing each other the balance sheet and look, we made it, look at the profit we made. But that's the concept, is really for us to mature out of this horny teenage boy syndrome. So for the time I have left with you, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about micro inspection, about the roommate that sits inside our head that thinks we are fat one day and so good looking the next day, and also the mega explorations about culture, future, HR, and leadership, and I'll end off with that. So let's get stuck into micro inspection. Alan Watts, an incredible philosopher from the 20th century, is not with us anymore. Unfortunately, this quote is from him, and he says, "The knowledgeable man has to learn something new every day, but the wise man has to unlearn something new every day." And this becomes incredibly hard for men after a period of time, because that thing's been so constantly focused on making the same decision over and over and over. Remember, the army, school, factory works, this is all sort of structural masculine ways of doing things. It becomes really difficult for us to unlearn. And one of the major problems for us to stop doing what we've always done is the fact that we've been successful in the past, and the success that we bring with us becomes something I call the ironic rut of success, where we become both the prisoner and the warden of this past success. And I do workshops around the world with excos, and about a third of the way through I always get the same comment. No, John, not that innovative. Come back. Let's just create an app. What if we just create an app? And that idea and concept, it's so like, let's just do a Facebook page. Well, that would change everything. And no, it won't. But that's the prison of success that we've had. We don't want to step out of what we've always done. We just want to do what we did yesterday with a little bit more efficiency, and we think that's going to be fine. And I know this prison far too well. I was 8 years old. I come from a single mom family, and my mom was a secretary. She was making around, I think, 750 Rand a month back then in the 80s, and that's when the yo-yo craze arrived in South Africa. I like how you perked up when I said 750 Rand a month. You're like, what? Anyway, so the yo-yo craze had arrived in South Africa, and my brother and I had seen the cool kids at school with the yo-yos, so with much excitement we got home to ask my mom to buy us a yo-yo each, and bless her heart, she couldn't afford to buy us one, and this must have really upset her, but it totally pissed me off. So I made a decision from 8 years old that I'm never going to be financially constrained ever again. And from 13 years old, I started getting my first job. I packed bags at the spa in Edenvale. If you ever drive past, send it a kiss. That's where my journey began. 3 rand 10 cents an hour, and I made a decision that I will never be financially constrained again, so I worked my butt off, and by the time I was 26, 27 years old, I was a multi-millionaire. I had a range of restaurants around South Africa, retail stores, vending machines, and shoe distribution businesses. I was flying high. I mean, the most dangerous and intoxicating combination is high levels of testosterone and lots of money. My God, does that shit hit the fan? And so what happened was, I could do no wrong. I had a range of fancy cars, fancy clothes, fancy businesses, fancy homes, and a fancy personality, you know what I'm saying? But I was from Joburg. And sorry, I know there's some Joburgers here. You still see some of those wankers driving around Joburg as well. I used to be one of them. And by the time I got to 30 years old, the bank started coming to take my fancy house, my fancy cars, everything started crumbling around me, and I had to declare bankruptcy. And I got stuck in this ironic rut of success because what I'd done for the first part of my 20s was so incredibly successful. In the last part of my 20s, things were changing around me, but I was so stuck in what I'd always done. What I decided to do was push sales even harder and cut costs. Sound familiar? Yep. Most of corporate world around the world is doing that. Cut costs, push sales harder. That just means your market's shrinking. We just keep fighting for that shrinking pie that gets smaller and smaller. That's what I did. And I blame it 100% on my high levels of testosterone. You see, boys in their 20s have got high levels of testosterone. None of the decisions are coming from your head, heart, you know where else they're coming from. And so when you're in a dick measuring contest, you can never make decisions about the future that are going to be great. They're always going to be short-term, horny teenage boy syndrome, idiotic decisions. And so what I did was, over the next 5 years, fall into a deep depression. And the genius of depression is that you often don't know that you're depressed. And I did what every teenage boy does, stuck in a man's body. I took zero responsibility for anything that was happening around me. It was the government, it was the Chinese people that are making things so much cheaper. It was my partners because they're lazy. It was my staff because they're thieves. It just was never my fault. And it was never be able to be my fault. And I got into this deep, deep depression, and I call it now the emotional long drop of victimization. You know, when you're swimming around in shit and everybody else is around you is also swimming in shit, you all smell as bad as each other, you don't even know you smell that bad. And this is victim thinking in sort of, in a nutshell. And there's different types of victims, but I'm going to tell you about 3 that I suffered from for 5 years. And the first one is the entitled victim. The person who always says, can't they see how amazing I am? Can't they see and recognize this magnificence that I am? And I remember saying that to my mom, quite literally in those exact words, and I couldn't pay a 6,000 rand rent. And this was debilitating for a boy who had so much and had nothing now, and it was a horrific thing. And I see entitlement everywhere. White South Africans are entitled, black South Africans are entitled, females are entitled, old males are entitled, young males, and everybody's entitled to something or another. The number 1 most entitled human being in the world, Donald Trump, multi-billionaire, most powerful person in the world, still complaining about things not going his way. So this entitlement is a sort of mask that sits inside our perception that we don't often even know that we're having. But not only type of victim, this falls under the martyr victim as well. Somebody who always feels sorry for themselves. Middle Eastern moms, I know I have one, always feeling sorry for themselves, that you don't visit them often enough, call them often enough, go and see them often enough, and blah, 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 often enough. That's just reverse bullying and martyr victim. But the second one is called the arrogant inferior victim. Let's say, for example, you're driving and you see a guy next to you in a Ferrari and you say, hey, nice car, but in your head you're like, thief, must be a thief. There's no way. Oh, dad, must be daddy's money. Oh, did you hear she got a promotion? She must have slept away to the top because she's not that smart. She's not that smart. Or I had a guy flying economy class and he had his feet up and his caption said on Facebook, look at those fools in business class paying those prices. Look at me in economy class with my feet stretched out. What happens when we become arrogantly inferior, we in our own arrogance, we pull anybody more successful than us and make them inferior to us. What we're saying actually is that you're never going to drive a Ferrari because you're going to have to be a thief. You're never going to get a promotion because you have to be a slut. And you're never going to fly business class because you're going to have to be a fool to pay those prices. So be careful when we start doing that. And that's a very quiet voice inside our heads to make ourselves feel better. But my favorite one is the arrogant superior victim, the person that is always angry with everything. The government, the rand dollar exchange, my boss, my wife, my friends, the rugby team, the rugby coach, the football coach. And then what I do is I invite all my other arrogant superior friends together, and we bri and bitch and moan about everything around us, from the potholes to the rand dollar exchange, because we in our own superiority are arrogant, all these fools that can't do anything below us properly. Just give me a chance on that rugby field. I'll show those guys what they should be doing. Meanwhile, the oak's a fat oak like this. But the only thing that changes is your blood pressure, and actually nothing else changes after this process of being angry with everything around us. And I suffered from this emotional long drop of victimization for 5 years. I didn't even know I was doing it. And that's the thing here, is that in order for us to get ready for the future, the first thing we must become aware of is that if we are victims, we cannot move forward. If we are not taking responsibility, we cannot move forward. We cannot blame, shame anybody and anything around us. And anybody who's operating at a high level will tell you exactly the same thing. Just stop being a victim of my circumstance. And the way I got out of this was exactly that, is I came to the realization that all the victim thinking that I was carrying with me was just a bad habit, something I'd learned along the way, because I never suffered from it in my 20s, but in my early 30s, all of a sudden, all my friends around me also smelled like shit, but I couldn't even smell it, because all of us were in the same boat with each other. I call it in my first book, peeing in your nappy. Obviously, it's a hypothetical scenario. I'm sorry that you're wearing a nappy here like you did last time, I remember. So let's say you're wearing a nappy, you're alone, it's winter, you're cold, and while you're in this strange place, all of a sudden you need a pee. So you start negotiating with yourself, shall I go have a pee, or shall I just have a pee? Because I am wearing a nappy, I don't often wear a nappy, and it's winter and I'm cold, and while you're in the negotiation, you're like, wow. Whew. Got my own little private jacuzzi here, I feel warm, I feel relieved. It's amazing what an incredible decision I made, and straight after the first 30 seconds, it becomes the worst decision you ever made. And this is exactly like victim thinking. Initially, you feel warm, you feel relieved, but you leave smelling like pee. And so next time you catch yourself falling into those traps and not being able to prepare for the future, just have a chuckle, because you don't want to scold yourself. Just, there I was, peeing in my nappy. And besides sounding like a self-help specialist, because I'm not one, I started to get myself out of this emotional long drop of victimization, and today I live a very different life than I did back then. And I followed a teacher by the name of Dr. Joe Dispenza, an incredible speaker and lecturer around the world, and this is what he says. He says that everybody has a mind. This mind is made up of a personality. This personality is made up of our behaviors. These behaviors are made up of our habits, and these habits are made up of our rituals. You know, when you wake up in the morning and for the first 10 seconds you don't know who you are, and then you become reminded of the personality you've decided to put into your head. And that software that we've decided to do is always broken down best into rituals. And when you can change one small ritual, from calling the guy in a Ferrari a thief to can't wait to be in one, that small ritual changes your behavior, your habits, your personality, and who you are. So next time you're looking at the future, and what I'm going to share with you for the rest of it, and that's why it's so important to start with this context, that if you're pessimistic about anything that's coming, that's changing too fast, remember that pessimism is just your ego saying that I'm not willing to have the courage to change myself to prepare for the future. That's all pessimism is. Optimism takes 100% courage, looking for opportunities rather than for danger. You see, our reptilian mind, our monkey mind, is always looking for danger, because our brains aren't designed to make us happy but keep us safe. So if you're pessimistic, you're actually in your monkey mind. And in order for you to become optimistic, it means you've evolved to start looking for those sort of opportunities. And think about it. If you are able to change these small rituals, you're able to change anything in your life. Because, I mean, if cauliflower became pizza, how the hell you can do anything you want to do, my friends? Okay, let's talk about the future. Cauliflower pizza, so shit. Terrible. Gluten intolerance bullshit. Anyway, okay, so mega exploration. So I want to talk about the future a little bit. I mean, you guys all know about the future. This is your game. This is not Sanlam. Anybody here from Sanlam before I say that? No, there's certain companies around that I work with are like, whoa, they're like way back, way back. No, Sanlam's actually pretty cool. I'm joking. I did some work with them recently. Capitalism, as we understand it today, really got a boost in 1750, the discovery of coal, giving us the opportunity to have a new energy source. The steam-powered railroads and the steam-powered printer gave us an opportunity to market to many more people than we've ever had. 1750 saw the boost of this capitalism, and if you think about it, this is what actually keeps up economies, the three pillars of economy: energy to create something, transportation to take it from point A to point B, and communication to be able to tell people about it. 1870, the power dynamics start to shift again in the sort of power struggle in the capitalist world, and America becomes the most powerful, and the discovery of oil gives us a new source to energy. Carl Benz invents the combustion engine, giving us the opportunity to have pilots and drivers in planes, trains, and automobiles, and electricity gives us the opportunity to now communicate with the world around us. This is the world that we are so used to today. And we're all very fixated about the fourth industrial revolution, and we're all very excited about it, and we've heard so many speakers about the fourth industrial revolution, but somehow the third industrial revolution has lost its space in the sort of concept of the future. And Jeremy Rifkin, a global economist who advises China, Germany, and the EU, written a New York bestseller called The Zero Marginal Cost Society, has got a documentary on YouTube called The Third Industrial Revolution, which is this slide, in 3 hours, 90 minutes. It's an excellent documentary. I highly recommend you watch it. And what he talks about is how these three pillars are changing. He says that we've gone from coal to oil to distributed, renewable, decentralized energy. We've gone from horse carriages, railroads, combustion engines with pilots and drivers to autonomous electric vehicles. And with communication, we've gone from newspaper, electricity, to now the internet. Anybody know the major difference between this industrial revolution and the other first two? This, over the next 10 years, will start moving towards becoming totally free. And if you think about it, if you think this is also a bit far-fetched, quick show of hands, how many people here use WhatsApp? Why? You're part of the third industrial revolution. Welcome to it. If you had told somebody 10 years ago that you'd be talking to people over the internet on video for free from pretty much anywhere in the world, what would you say? Oh, you mad, but Vodacom's ripping us $3.20 just to talk to each other around the corner. Now you're telling me they're going to give up that and go for free? This is exactly the same thing. When we talk about energy and transportation, you can't even conceive of the concept of it being free. How? Is it even possible? But this is what's coming for us. And if we just understand that just communication, which is the one we understand the most, Skype and WhatsApp have disrupted the telecom sector by $386 billion and counting. $2 billion is what Skype benefited, 19 billion WhatsApp, $365 billion evaporated into thin air. This makes economists very, very scared, because we're seeing the deflation of economy start to happen because of this zero marginal cost society. And very quickly, the fourth industrial revolution, which we hear so much about, but at Singularity University, what we say is that the fourth industrial revolution is just a convergence of the fastest moving exponential technologies. I don't need to tell this room any of that, but just a quick story. I went to San Francisco, and they were talking to us about the car of the future, and the car of the future is a convergence of these in them: network, sensors, artificial intelligence, and blockchain inside the car. The car arrives and says, "Hello, John." I say, "Hello, car." Say, "Where are you going?" I say, "To the airport." Says, "No problem, $25, voice recognition, blockchain, mini contract." Money goes into the car's account. We start driving towards the airport. I realize I'm running late. I tell the car, "Listen, if I'm running late." The car says, "No problem, just give me another $10. I say, "No problem." Another $10 gets transferred into the account. The car then starts talking to every other car on the road, giving it each $1 to get out the way so we can get to the airport quicker. This becomes the advent of the fourth industrial revolution. And we've seen innovation and disruption happen over history of us as humanity. And the only shift that's starting to happen is the time it's happening in, as you very well know. It took 50 million users 68 years to fly. It took 50 million users 14 years to use a computer. It took 50 million users 7 years to use the internet, 5 years to use PayPal, 3 years to use Facebook, 2 years to use Twitter, and it took 50 million users 4 months to play Candy Crush. This is the speed at which we're starting to see things move. So as we start moving into this future, how do we shift leadership? How do we go about telling somebody that you used to tell in 1997, "Don't sit too close to the TV or damage your eyes"? In 2017, this is what you get now. I won't sit too close, Mom, I promise. And if you are leading people, and do you know who the smartest person in a room is? Anybody with a smartphone and a connection to Google. How do you lead people that are smarter than you and have got more connection than you and understand the world quicker than you do? How do you go from a society that says to her father, "Dad, I want to be an actor"? No, better, it's pronounced doctor, not actor. And so what we realize is that this concept that we are dealing with Zeds now at work, millennials, zillennials, X generation, baby boomers, all of this is starting to merge into something that people are starting to call generation flux. We are all starting to pick up different connotations and attachments and needs from different sort of sectors. The first time ever where a millennial phoned a baby boomer boss and said, "Hey boss, can I wear shorts to work?" And the boss was like, "What? You little shit. How do you mean you want to wear shorts? That's not the way we do things here." And so after a bit of negotiation, eventually the baby boomer gives in and the millennial wears shorts to work. And the first time ever there's somebody at shorts at work. 3 weeks go by and the baby boomer is at home and he looks out the window and it's going to be 36 degrees that day and he says, "Geez, I wish I could wear shit, I can wear shorts. Hey, I can start wearing shorts." And that's generation flux, as we're starting to move and flux in and out of these sort of need states that different generations have. So let's talk about the corporate culture that we need to start creating and the culture that we need to start blossoming in within to be able to create a culture for the future. And one of the quotes I was reading from Professor Sumantra Ghoshal, who's very famous on YouTube, he's got a bunch of followers on there. He says that culture is either like Kolkata, where he comes from, and in Kolkata, temperature nearly 40 degrees Celsius, humidity 98%. In the summer, all you want to do is sit inside, stay in bed, and sleep. Or he does lecture in parts of France, and he says, "Oh, your culture could be like Fontainebleau, and in spring you go for a walk, but something about the trees, the smell of the air, just makes you want to jog, jump, catch a branch, and throw a stone." So you need to ask yourself your question: does your corporate culture smell like Kolkata or Fontainebleau when you go into your business? And that becomes the construct of us understanding if we're building an anxious environment, we're living in Calcutta. If we're building an excitement environment, we're building Fontainebleau. Because excited begets excitement, anxiousness gets us to shrink smaller and smaller and smaller, and we can't be creative when we're anxious at all. And ultimately what we want to do in the workplace is very simple. Is solve some incredibly big challenges with some smart people. That's all it is. Ultimately at work, that's what we want to do. When you leave work, the emotions you want to have are going to be two. You want to be totally exhausted, but exhilarated. When you can combine those two at the end of every day or end of every week, you're winning at life. Because what else would you want to be doing? Exhausted and fatigued, you're dying. You're in Calcutta. When you're exhausted and exhilarated, you've been running around that forest in Fontainebleau so many times that you're so overjoyed by it that you collapse and can't wait to get back in there the next day. So I'm going to tell you there's 4 things that we need to be doing in order to create the culture of the future and as leaders of the future. The first one, and I'm going to give you examples of each one of these with organizations that have practiced them to great success. The first one is radical transparency, radical freedom, the best information at our fingertips, and ultimate responsibility. And I wanted to take 3 very different businesses to show you how they've applied these sort of 4 rules to creating the culture of the future. You want to take a photo of it? Are you done? This is my good side. Do you want to take it again? So the first one, GE, a company that's hundreds of years old, had to reinvent itself many different times. I'm going to talk about what they've done in order to create radical transparency and best knowledge at your fingertips. Pep, a local superhero of ours that 14 years ago was bankrupt and has now had double-digit growth over the last 14 years. I'm going to show you what they've done with their culture. And Bridgewater Investments, the most successful investment house in the world, Ray Dalio and his book Principles has now become a global bestseller because of the principles he's applied. I'm going to show you what they've done with their culture. So first up, let's talk about General Electric. They did radical transparency and best information at your fingertips. Just to quickly let you know that GE has 300,000 permanent employees and 300,000 consultants. They have 600,000 people that they need to bring in line to be in line with their culture. And they launched an employee engagement system in 1976, which they just recently, over the last few years, have now changed with an app, believe it or not. I know I mocked apps earlier, but this app is actually changing GE quite significantly. The app is called Performance Development at GE, and this is what this app does. It does 2 things. It is an internal Twitter. And so what happens with the PD at GE, there is knowledge sharing between all the thought leaders inside GE, giving best information at your fingertips. But here's the massive change that it's brought about. It has GPS coordinates in it, and it can measure how often or who is coming together for longer than 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and it deems that you're in a meeting together if you're colleagues. And when you're colleagues and having a meeting together, as soon as you leave, you get 3 questions asked about everybody else you were in the meeting with, to give immediate feedback on the performance of that person within the meeting. This is radical transparency, radical feedback, where you're getting feedback. It's called performance development at General Electric. Keep in mind it's performance management, not performance development. And what's happening is that you're getting feedback from every angle, from somebody below you, same level as you, above you. So you're not waiting for quarterly measurement of how good you've been throughout the year. This is constant. And we know that if you are measured, of big brothers watching you, you change your behavior. We know with Discovery, with their watch, if you haven't reached your steps, you get to the bottom of your building, you live on the 6th, you're like, I've got to run up to the stairs trying to make up. So we change our behavior when we start getting measured. And this is exactly what GE has done to great success. PEP, a company that really brought about radical freedom and ultimate responsibility within its workforce, and a very great example of how they have ritualized their values. You see, a lot of organizations have values that are never brought into the company's behavior because they've never been ritualized. If you know, the number 1 ritual in the world that we all love watching is the haka. The haka is a ritual that invokes the warrior spirit in the All Blacks. It's got absolutely nothing to do with rugby, 0. But it's about bringing that value system, ritualizing it to make it a behavior and a habit. And PEP has been excellent at that. So, like I said, they started off as a clothing retail store. 14 years ago, they were nearly bankrupt, but they changed their culture and have now double-digit growth ever since. They started off as clothing, but they're now the number 1 distributor of cell phone contracts around South Africa. They do family, funeral cover, account payments. They do a whole bunch of different things, just very much like Amazon, who's jumped sectors as many different times as they need to stay relevant to their consumers. They've now got 1,400 stores, 14,000 employees, and it was 14 years ago. I thought that was incredible. There's so many 14s in the story, but that's a whole other talk. This is from the MD, Leon Lawrence. He says, a company that only exists to make money is a very poor company. If you're only in it for the money, you're a mercenary. When you're driven by purpose, you become a missionary. And because of this process, what they've had is 52% of internal promotions and 92% staff retention. Their employees are not employees, but dynamos. They don't shake hands. They high-five each other. And every store starts every morning with a prayer or a song. That's really instilling a ritual, a habit, and a behavior that's created ultimate responsibility for all their stores that are flung around South Africa. They also don't believe in feedback. They call it feed forward. And it's about really giving feedback that's able to help people move into the future better. I forgot I have a video with sound in it. Is it going to work on VGA? Should? Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, it's a 4-minute video, but I'm going to show it to you now. So Bridgewater Investment, they practice something called radical transparency and ultimate responsibility. I love this example. Thank you, bro. I got a sound thing right there. Can I? Thanks so much. I love this example because Ray Dalio is just incredible at the way he's built this business and the principles that he's used and the radical transparency that he uses. You'll see in the video, it's actually mind-boggling, and this is what they've done. He's now the most successful fund manager ever. He's invested over $150 billion. He's made money 23 out of 20. When I say he, it's actually not him at all. And you'll see in the video what I mean. The company has made money for 23 out of the 26 years. They have 1,700 employees around the world, and he has a very clear way of making decisions. There's 3 ways that you can make decisions. The first one is the autocratic way to make decisions, where you take one person and just follow that person's decision-making process, or the democracy, which means that everybody must have a voice. He also thinks that's bullshit. He's created something, or no, he's not created it, but he practices something called meritocracy, which is really based on how we make decisions based on merit, not position, not power, not money, and not having everybody's voice heard. It's a 5-minute video, but it's unbelievable for me what he does. They've invented a piece of platform or an interface called the DOT, and this is how they make decisions inside their organizations. No, but I mean, you had a 24-year-old researcher calling him out on the way he thought, and I just thought that was such a conscious, elegant way around going and building businesses. I mean, I think this could work in a marriage as well, really well. So building a company where the best ideas win become the real crux of leadership in the future. You are not important in the structure. The leadership is about creating the environment for us to understand our humans and allow them to thrive. And ultimately, the humans that we are leading are all humans. And humans, quite deep in our psychology, do everything we do to gain attention, acceptance, and approval. That's just the way we're built. The clothes we wear, the handbags we buy, the cars we drive, the football teams we follow, the rugby teams we follow, it's to get attention, acceptance, and approval from our peers and people around us. Bad leaders become aggressive to gain attention, acceptance, and approval. Bad leaders compete to gain attention, acceptance, and approval. Bad leaders beg for attention, acceptance, and approval. Great leaders and leaders of the future are the ones who are able to give attention, acceptance, and approval. And when we're able to give it, we become selfless in our leadership style. And for us to understand the future we're moving into, we need as many people on board bringing their opinions as often as possible to help us prepare for this future. And hopefully as many young people into the room as well to get them to bring the solutions for themselves. And I want to leave you with 6 shots of foresight. 6 tips, hopefully, that will allow you to ask questions that make you a little bit more uncomfortable and just rezone your focus. The first one is this. Most talks I do, in fact, today I was on a briefing this morning, and the question came as well. It's like, what is the one thing we can do, John? Just the one thing that can prepare us for the future. And the one thing you can do is a process called accretion. It comes from the solar system, the word, and it's about space dust that's floating through space. And after a few thousand years, the space stuff starts colliding. For a few million years, more and more of it starts colliding. And eventually what you have over a few million years is a star that's born. You see, we don't choose our futures, we choose our rituals and habits, and our rituals and habits become our future. So the one silver bullet is to change small, incremental, daily behaviors of yourself and your organization to become more future-focused rather than past-focused. The second one is future-proofing yourself. And a lot of people say, well, how do I go about doing this? And often I say, make Friday mornings from 8 to 9 o'clock future mornings. Get your teams over, get them to start focusing on something about the future, get a TED Talk, get a blog, get whatever you want. And in fact, do it with your families as well on a Thursday night for half an hour. Everybody sits around and just watches something about the future so your language can start changing, your focus points can start changing, and so when somebody tells you about drones arriving, you're not that shocked. Third, the most difficult thing we need to do is to think laterally and move away from our capability and competitive advantage. This becomes extremely tough because we've spent so long building our capabilities and making sure that we're beating our competition. For us to move out of this dynamic and start to ask questions on the peripherals becomes really tough. And this becomes easier and easier when you future-proof yourself through a process of accretion. Fourth, thanks very much. Tell them I'm not here. Leaders, like I spoke about, high-value leaders are the ones who listen, are the ones who are able to spike confidence in people around them by listening to them. The concept of spiking confidence comes from a guy called Rene Carriol, and what he was saying was the discussions we have at school are broken because the first night that you go and see your kids' teacher, the teacher will call you across and say, listen, Marky's maths is not that good. So what we're going to do is we're going to put Marky into 2 extra maths lessons so we can bring him up to the average. And the discussion is broken, and what it should be is Marky's unbelievable in English. What we're going to do is give him 2 extra English lessons a week, and we're going to spike his English and let the rest of his confidence come with him. And so leaders of the future are the ones that listen more and need less to be seen or heard. And second, lastly, my favorite or least type of favorite person is a no-but person. Rather be a yes-and person and allow the process to fuel itself through experimentation and realization of what the future might look like. And ultimately, we need to stop treating our businesses like factories and much more like laboratories. And when we start doing that, we start to realize that in the age of exponential disruption, the most dangerous thing we can do is what we did yesterday. And tomorrow is either one day or day one. This becomes your incredible privilege of choice. Thank you so much for your attention.
So on Friday last week, we had the privilege at Silica, some of us had the privilege of attending a talk by Yuri Levine. Those of you that don't know him, he's the founder of Waze and quite a few other startups, and his mission in life is to just create startups. And what he was talking about is when you're creating a startup, don't focus on what you're going to do. Focus on the problem that you're solving. Go speak to the people that are having the problem, the opportunity, And he had a saying at the bottom of one of his slides, which I think really is a nice way to sum up today, is fall in love with the problem, not with the solution. And I think that's really epitomizes what we've gone through today. This morning was really getting us all on the same page and understanding that there is a big problem facing our country, our lives, in getting people to be financially independent. And then we grew through the day into using technology, and now John has aptly reminded us that it takes people and leadership to bring it all together to solve that problem. So thank you for spending the day with us, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend the day. Most of you spent the entire day with us. We're not finished yet. Cocktails are just down the passage in the Atlantic room. It looks like the clouds have cleared a little bit. It should be a great evening. And I have it on good authority that the drinks are on ice. Hopefully you had a day of learning something new, of maybe thinking differently about some things. Maybe you met somebody new. Maybe you re-established some acquaintances. And I'd like to thank the speakers, those of you that are still here, for inspiring us, challenging us, making us feel a little bit uncomfortable at some stages during the day.